This is the WootBook Titan 16 X3D, and it is the best value high-end gaming laptop in this country. Sold by Wootware in South Africa, this 16-inch Ryzen X3D RTX 5080 portable playing machine offers so much compared to any of the competition that exists here, and it's sold at such a ridiculous price that I'm honestly baffled. It's also an insane value in the United States. You'll just have to find it under a different name there. More on that in a bit though. We've reviewed a lot of high-end gaming laptops this year on UFD Tech. The Razer Blade 16 and 18, the Asus Scar with the 5090, MSI's Raider A18 with the 5090 and 9950 HX3D, and the WootBook is the best combination of all possible worlds in terms of performance per size to make it my go-to choice. It does have its drawbacks, which I'll make sure to highlight in this review, but none of them are deal breakers, just improvement notes for next time. Let's start off with the exterior and we'll worm our way into the innards of this aluminum housing notebook. The build quality on the WootBook Titan feels sturdy and unyielding. The metal frame is solid, but doesn't actually make it all that bulky considering the hardware that it's got throbbing inside. It's only between 5 and 8 millimeters thicker than the new 2025 Razer Blade 16, their thinnest 16-inch notebook yet. Now the Titan is 40% thicker and it weighs about 20% more than the Blade 16, but when we get to the performance numbers, we'll see why that's not such a bad thing at all. Exact dimensions are 20 to 25 millimeters thick and 2.55 kilograms. Not a massive notebook, especially when you park it next to an 18-inch behemoth like the MSI Raider. Another nice thing about the build of the laptop is that there's no obvious branding on the visible portions of it. A clean rear side of the panel with only a WootBook printing on the undercarriage, and as long as you turn off the RGB keyboard and light bar on the front, this thing won't stand out in a professional environment or coffee shop. Speaking about its underside, it's got nicely vented hexagonal panels that actually do a decent job of keeping the internal components cool, especially considering how much power they're outputting. Now I know I said we'll work our way in, but I'm gonna skip ahead slightly and just talk quickly about the cooling choices here. Instead of having some thermal paste lathered underneath the heatsink, it's actually got phase change thermal pads. Not necessarily the highest performance option like liquid metal in an Asus Scar notebook, but it has the added advantage of performing really well over a much longer period of time without needing replacement anywhere near as soon. A legit benefit if you plan to keep the notebook around for any length of time. And for all of our testing, the CPU never went above 89C when pulling 75 watts of juice, and the GPU topped out at 81C when sucking down 175 watts of the power. In more modest gaming scenarios, the CPU is typically only using 50-ish watts, and then the CPU is a more tame 80C. Getting back to the exterior, let's talk about the I/O, which is decent, but disappointing. On the left-hand side, you're greeted with a handy 2.5 gigabit per second LAN port, a couple USB 3.2 ports, which is one Gen 2 Type-C port and one Gen 1 Type-A port, along with an audio combo jack. The right side gives you two more of those 5 gigabit per second Type-A ports, as well as an SD 7.0 SD card reader that can go up to 985 megabytes per second. Then finally, on the rear, you're greeted with an HDMI 2.1 and mini DisplayPort 2.1A, another Gen 2 USB-C along with the DC barrel in. And while that's a comprehensive amount of ports, multiple display outs is super appreciated, they're just all really slow by 2025 standards, at least on the USB side. A lot of high-end laptops run some form of Thunderbolt now. The Scar has Thunderbolt 5 capable of up to 120 gigabits. The Razer Blade 16, while also being an AMD setup like the WootBook Titan, has multiple USB 4 Type-C ports, which are capable of running Thunderbolt in case you want super high-speed peripherals, Thunderbolt docks, or even external GPUs. The WootBook Titan can run a couple external SSDs with its 10 gigabit ports, but not much more. If you're using this thing as a true on-the-go machine, it's not such a big deal, but if you're parking at a desk, your options will be limited to slower bandwidth setups. Moving to the inside of the clamshell, you've got a full keyboard, including a little itty-bitty smoosh 10 key, and prepare for the biggest, chunkiest Microsoft Copilot button you've ever had the displeasure of seeing. Thankfully, you can easily deactivate it with the WootBook's included control center software. That's also where you'll control the underwhelming RGB options for the per key lighting setup and the front light bar. It's not that the RGB looks bad, it's just that there's limited configuration options and the speed tends to be so slow you see the discrete movements instead of it looking continuous. I can excuse all of that because 1, you can turn it off, and 2, this is one of the best mobile keyboards keyboards I've typed on. It's only membrane, but the feedback is enjoyable for that type of setup, and I can easily hit my max typing speed here. You add in the fact that there's a magnificent glass touchpad that's one of the best that I've used on a Windows laptop, and actually interacting with the little gremlins inside the machine is a treat. The click area on the touchpad is sensible. I'm not ever accidentally left clicking when I meant to right click or vice versa, and the palm rejection is enough that scrolling whole-handedly isn't a frustrating nightmare. It's an A- overall from me on the keyboard and touchpad. Now, let's talk about the other exceptional portion of the internal clamshell, the display. The WootBook Titan 16 is rocking a 16-inch 2560 by 1600 IPS mini LED display with local dimming zones. 300 Hz is the refresh rate, along with 100% of the DCI-P3 color space, but the real immaculate portion is the brightness. It's HDR 1000, but can go up to 1200 nits in HDR mode and 600 nits in SDR mode. In my review of the Blade 16, I talked about how it was my laptop of choice to bring to South Africa because of its form factor, yes, its performance, also yes, but mostly its panel. It's a glossy OLED 240 Hz screen at the same resolution of the WootBook. Its gloss was a detracting factor, but so was its brightness, since that's where OLED primarily struggles, and I can say that the WootBook 16 has replaced the Blade 16 thanks to its impeccable HDR setup. A matte screen, 1000 plus nits of brightness, and local dimming gets you as close to OLED as you can get while also making games look properly brilliant. And just above that luminous panel is a 1080p webcam that also has IR to make it ready for Windows Hello login. It does have a physical shutter in case you don't want Microsoft watching you though. Now that I've gushed about the inside of the outside, let us properly go into the internals of this notebook and yap about the specs that truly make this thing stand apart from the competition. The key highlight is the Ryzen 9 9955 HX3D 16-core X3D CPU, the fastest mobile gaming CPU that we've ever tested. You can go ahead and see what it performs like when it's paired with a 5090 and plenty of thermal headroom in our MSI Raider A18 review right up there. But it also enables the RTX 5080 in the WootBook to go plenty speed as well. The RTX 5080 in the Titan 16 is the beefy 150 watt version, but also comes with an extra 25 watts of dynamic boost. There's also two DDR5 slots for up to 96 gigabytes of RAM, and this is where I'm gonna have to dock Wootware some points. On their website for configuration, every section says that it's high-speed memory, but they actually equip it with RAM that's slower than the rated spec of the 9955 HX3D. The Ryzen 9 is rated for 5600 megatransfers, but Wootware kits their notebooks out with 4800 sticks by default on their configuration page. Likely, this isn't really impacting performance too much since the latency difference between a DDR5 4800 CL40 and a DDR5 5600 CL46 RAM set is basically negligible, but the mismatch of specs makes me question the high-speed naming, especially when every other 9955 HX3D laptop I can find ships with the proper rated RAM speed. I don't see why that couldn't be done here as well, especially when the spec sheet on Wootware's own website for the Titan says DDR5 5600. But you can also buy it bare bones and slap your own RAM in there if you want some at the correct speed. The problem I have is the default configuration. You can also slap in up to two M.2 NVMe SSDs, one at Gen 5 and another at Gen 4. Wootware's configuration on the site provides you with a Gen 4 unit that goes up to 7.4 gigabytes per second read, but you do have a whole other untapped Gen 5 slot at your disposal. And just for clarity, the review unit that they sent me has 64 gigs of that DDR5 4800 and a 1 terabyte model of the HIX Semi Future. Additionally, on the inside, you get a Wi-Fi 6E plus Bluetooth 5.2 wireless card, a 99 watt-hour battery for maximum battery life, and two 2-watt speakers. The sound quality on those speakers is fine. It's paired with Nahimic software that lets you configure the EQ, but they're just not particularly powerful enough at 2 watts to make a lot of noise, and their definition and clarity is also okay. Nothing exceptional. Battery life is also okay for a gaming laptop. Balanced mode with 50% brightness and SDR yielded about 90 minutes of gaming. Just watching YouTube videos gave about 2 hours at the same visual settings, enough to let you untether for a while, but not an all-day battery machine either. There's not much you can do do about that when both chips in this computer are just absolute power hogs? But while we're on the topic of power, I have another small quibble to bring up with Wootware here. The 250 watt included power brick is actually surprisingly small, but my review unit came with the wrong power plug. It requires a Clover plug, but they shipped it with a kettle plug. Not the biggest deal in the world, not even worth contacting them about since I have extra plugs lying around, but definitely a quality control thing they should keep an eye on in the future. What Wootware does do right though is the pre-installed software with the Windows 11 installation. No bloat besides the typical Microsoft nonsense like Teams and Copilot, but drivers were installed properly and only a few helpful apps installed outside of that. Foxit PDF Reader, VLC, and 7-Zip were appreciated inclusions. And then there's the Control Center app, which is how you interact with a lot of the parts of the notebook. You can lock the Windows key, function key, turn off the Copilot button, enable USB hibernation power, messing with the mid RGB lighting, and most importantly, change power profiles. You've got the normal power saver, balanced, and then performance, but it also gives you an extreme performance or a quiet performance that'll ramp up the fans to your desired ear levels. And we have to talk about the software extending to the BIOS, which, since it's a laptop BIOS, I'm not expecting very much, but I was pleasantly surprised to see that there's CCD controls to enable or disable either CCD to make it an effective 8-core or 16-core, and you can toggle simultaneous multi-threading if you want. Both helpful inclusions. Other than that, it's your standard run-of-the-mill BIOS, nothing too special here. What is not weird is the performance that the WootBook Titan 16 X3D puts out. I was expecting some serious frame rates coming out of this thing after a review of the MSI Raider that had the same X3D chip but with the 5090. But what I wasn't expecting was how much it competes with 5090 laptops. So we've got a few comparisons that we're going to be making here. The MSI Raider A18 made the trip over the Atlantic with me, as did the Razer Blade 16, both with RTX 5090s. The MSI laptop has the 9955H X3D and the highest TDP 5090, whereas the Blade 16's 5090 is the 155 watt version. And the Razer notebook is also using a slightly lesser Ryzen AI 9 HX370 CPU with only 12 cores. I tested everything at the native resolution of the WootBook of 2560 by 1600, and it's definitely impressive. In synthetic tests like 3D Mark's Time Spy Extreme and Port Royal, the WootBook is definitely behind the Blade 16 and everything besides CPU performance. It does have the 3D cache and 4 more cores, but benchmarks aren't the same as games. In most of the games I tested, the WootBook is actually faster than the Blade 16. 22% better in Cyberpunk at high settings with no ray tracing. When you turn ray tracing on though, the Blade is 2% better. The same was also true for Black Myth Wukong, where the Blade 16's extra RT cores on the 5090 helped it to be 7% faster when it's on, but the TDP limitations make it 5% slower at just normal high settings. GTA 5 Enhanced also swung in the WootBook's favor, as did Marvel Rivals by nearly 30%. That X3D CPU just absolutely spreading its legs. Comparing the 5080 in the WootBook to the 5090 in the Raider is a bit of a different story. Once they're on the same CPU ground, on average, the Raider was 16 to 25% faster, with only GTA 5 Enhanced being a draw between the two. I do want to point out that the MSI Raider A18 costs 64% more than the WootBook, and a 5090 is a possible configuration for the WootBook. It's just out of stock right now. But that's not all. The numbers I just showed you were for the WootBook in balanced mode. When you put it in extreme performance mode and the 5080 can boost up to 175 watts, it trounces the Razer Blade 16 even more. Beats it in ray tracing in Cyberpunk and ties it in ray tracing in Black Myth Wukong, and extends the Marvel Rivals lead to nearly 40%. The WootBook really puts the 20% extra weight and 40% extra thickness to good use. The extreme performance mode also narrows the gap to the Raider 5090 to about 20%, again for way less money. Speaking of, let's go ahead and talk brass bucks. Both South African Rand and US dollars here. Bare bones, the WootBook Titan 16 X3D costs 48,000 Rands, the equivalent of roughly $2,700. With it as spec'd in this video, that's just under 54,000 Rands, or 3,150 US. To add some context before we discuss it anymore, as an American living in South Africa, I've become accustomed to paying more for tech here. here. 25 to 40% price hikes for tariff reasons and whatnot has come to be the norm for me. But that 54,000 rands, it beats out nearly any 9955H X3D plus 5080 laptop that you can find in the United States. There's this Lenovo Legion Pro 7 that can be similarly spec'd for $100 less, which is great and all until you remember that the US doesn't include tax in their price, but South Africa does. And suddenly, with a nominal 7% tax rate, the Lenovo is now $100 more than the WootBook. The VAT here in SA is 15%, so raw cost is technically lower. Congrats if you live in a no sales tax state, but for most of the US population, they're gonna have to pay it. The Raider 18 does come in a 5080 variant, but that's $150 more than the WootBook before tax. And then there's the Blade 16 with the 5090 that got trounced on. That costs nearly $1,500 more, but that's the razor expensive tax for you. So when I say that the WootBook 16 X3D is a good deal, I'm not even just talking locally in this country. It is a good deal compared to any laptop on the market that has similar specs. And that includes the exact same model in the United States, sort of. You see, while Wootware's logo is on the box and the boot up screen, they actually contract with another company that physically constructs the laptops for them to sell. Specifically, this is known as the Tongfang X6 FR558Y. And guess what? You can buy this laptop in America under the brand name of Dream Machines. They sell this exact same notebook with a few key differences. Number one, the Dream Machines come with a slightly smaller battery of 90 watt hours versus the 99 here, a 10% difference. But that's likely because they had to make room for the water cooling accessory that comes with it. Now, I can't comment on how cool that will keep the laptop, but it does make me curious why Wootware went with the non-water cooling revision. Regardless, you can get the Dream Machines RT5080 with the exact same specs as the WootBook Titan 16 X3D for about $330 less before tax on their own website, or $140 less after tax. Just a 4% difference between getting this laptop in the United States and here in South Africa. I am absolutely not used to that. It's honestly baffling. Wootware has achieved something special with the WootBook Titan 16 X3D. Insane performance in a really well-constructed form factor that doesn't make me wish I was purchasing it off of Newegg instead of with them. I'm personally saying goodbye to the Blade 16 now and using the WootBook as my daily gaming machine. The HDR brightness is so good, the performance is equal or better to it, and since it's from Wootware, it makes me feel like I'm right at home again.